Hello, boys and girls of all ages, and welcome back. I'm sorry that I wasn't here to give you a story last week, but this week you're gonna have two. So, this one's tonight's video, and then tomorrow I'll be doing another story. Okay, so got my little teddy here, really nice and cozy, nice and snuggly. I shall begin. So this week's story is all about Bipsy the Bumblebee. So, boys and girls, bees are very important to our planet because they do a thing that's called pollination. And what pollination is Bipsy the bee and the rest of his bee families will go from flower to flower and they will gather the pollen to make honey. Have you had honey before? If you haven't, I suggest you try it because it's very yummy. But also, they go and they pollinate, so they spread pollen from one flower to the other, and they get the pollen from the center of a flower, and that the center of the flower is normally called the pollen of the flower. So Bipsy and me are going to be looking at different flowers and where they get the pollen from and learn some facts about some beautiful flowers too. Would you like that? Yeah, I love flowers. I love all different types of flowers, but I shall tell you my favourite flower is a sunflower. I just love sunflowers because they're big and they're bright and they're beautiful. Do you think you can tell me where Bipsy the bee would get the pollen from this flower? That's right, from the centre. And if you didn't guess centre, then that's alright because that's what we're here for. We're here to learn. So, sunflowers are big and beautiful, but they're actually some of the tallest flowers in the world because they grow so tall. And I guess that's kind of one of the reasons as well why I like it, because I'm so tall myself. But yes, what favourite flower is your favourite flower, Bipsy? The lily. It's funny you should say that because the lily was my grandma's favourite. So this is the lily. And this flower is a very fascinating flower because it's got so different parts of it. So, if you can you see all the different parts in the middle? Let's bring it up forward a little bit. So, this little bit, yeah, because you've got these and then you've got the centre bit. Now, the centre bit is called the stigma, and that's where Bipsy would get the pollen from because it's not really like the other flowers, isn't it? It's not really like the sunflower where the pollen is just in the middle like that. Can you see the difference, boys and girls? Difference of the pollen in the middle and the pollen in the stigma. Can you see that? Stigma. And the other ones, so these have stems too, but they're called different. They've got different names. And this bit here, these little stems are called filament. And these little brown little tops of the filaments are called anther. So if you have any lilies in your house, or you visit your grandma, your gran, your nana, and she has lilies in their house, have you noticed that you could brush against the lilies and you get like this brown stain stuff on your clothes or your skin? Well, that's off the anther, and that's kind of to protect the flower. So if you touch it and you get the stuff on your hands, it's harmless, but it will stain. But that's just so that can protect the flower, the lily. So yes, so Bipsy would get the pollen from the stigma, and it will pass over pollen from other flowers to the stigma. But yes, plus, did you know, this is very fascinating as well, that the stigma can get moist from the air. Did you know that? From the air and feed the lily. I find that so fascinating. Because most plants like the sunflower would get fed from rain or if you water them, but the lily can get like moist from the air, and I find that so fascinating. So they're very interesting plants, aren't they? And they're very beautiful, boys and girls. So, Bipsy, what should we discuss next? Which flower do you think we should do? The tulip. Oh, I like the tulip. So, the tulips are quite hard to get the pollen from, aren't they, Bipsy? Because, as you can see, they're quite tight together. But when it's nice and hot outside, or these are fully developed, they open up so Bipsy can go inside and get the pollen. But yes, I do love tulips because they're kind of unusual, aren't they, Bipsy? The way they close up their petals and then they open them up after a while. Sometimes they can close them again. It's kind of like a little fly trap, isn't it? Next, I used to love this flower when I was little. It's Daisy. So, we've discussed the sunflower. Let's see if you can remember. Where can you get the pollen from this flower, boys and girls? That's right, from the centre, from the pollen right here. Now, daisies are quite fun to play with because they can make daisy chains. But when I was a little girl, boys and girls, and I used to fancy a boy, I used to play Does He Love Me or Does He Love Me Not, because I used to pick the petals. But I guess that's kind of not fair to the daisy, is it? Because we should just leave the daisy alone and let it be, and let it grow and be beautiful. But yes, I like daisies too. What other flowers is there? Roses. Yes, rose. A rose is my mum's favourite flower because they're so beautiful. And you know what roses remind me of, boys and girls? Reminds me of Beauty and the Beast, and that's one of my favourite Disney films. But yes, also like the tulip, it's also quite hard to get the pollen from the flower, but it does have pollen right in the middle. But it has so many different petals to try to protect the pollen that it's quite hard for Bipsy to get to. But you can get pollen from a rose. You can get pollen from most flowers, to be honest with you. Probably every flower. Is that right, Bipsy? Yeah, I think so. So, we've only got 3 more flowers, Bipsy. Should we do the bluebells? Bluebells are beautiful because, well, this isn't a very good picture, boys and girls, but I do love bluebells, especially when you go to a forest and the bluebells cover the whole of the forest floor, and it kind of makes me feel as if I'm like in a fairy little land. It looks beautiful, and you can also get them in white as well. So yes, but the pollen is it's kind of like the lily, but apart from it doesn't really have the anther, so it doesn't have the dye, but they do have little pollen and little stigmas that hide under their petals, and these are quite easy to get the pollen from, aren't they, Bipsy? So Bipsy can go up and go inside and get the pollen from there. Next one, I'm pretty sure you might know this one, is the poppy. So the pollen in here is quite darker than normal flowers, but the poppy is also used for remembrance, isn't it, for the war. So a lot of men went to fight for our country, and if it wasn't for them that saved our country and put their lives on the line, boys and girls, we could be living in a total different world. We could actually be speaking German right now instead of English. So I think we should remember not just once a year on Poppy Day, but the whole year round. We should remember they're men that put their lives on the line, but also a lot of women put their lives on the line because they had to step in the men's place and do all the men's work like mining, farming, and also a lot of women helped all the injured soldiers. So that is what the poppy is for. But I do like poppies, especially poppy fields, because I think they're really spectacular. Now, the last flower is a forget-me-not. So, a forget-me-not is also used for the animals that also died, and they also didn't really have a choice, because animals don't really have a choice. An animal can't really say, I don't want to go, do they? Can they? So we use the forget-me-nots for the horses and the other animals that actually were killed in the war. So I think when you're thinking about pollen but when you're thinking about poppies and forget-me-nots, you should remember the war. And if you don't know much about it, if you haven't learned it in school yet, then I think you should ask your parents about it, or your grandparents might know even more about it, because it is quite an important part of our history. So that's all the flowers, boys and girls. I hope you've enjoyed looking at all the flowers with me and Bipsy and learning a bit about pollination. And I suggest, why don't you ask your mum and dad to see if you can get some seeds, plant some flowers, because they're not very expensive. I mean, you don't have to. You can look after the flowers that are in your garden, make sure they're watered and looked after, get rid of the weeds so the flowers don't die because of the weeds, and make sure they get plenty of sun so Bipsy and his bee friends can come and pollinate, because 90% of plants alone rely on pollination. So if you had a big pizza and you took one slice of that pizza, just a tiny slice out of that pizza, then the rest of the pizza is that 90%. That's a big amount, boys and girls, and that's a lot of the population of flowers that rely on bees and also birds, because birds, they eat the seeds and then they poop but then their poop can also pollinate and help other flowers grow and plant other the seeds can also help other flowers to grow, and it's very fascinating. I think it's very fascinating, isn't it, Bipsy? But yes, I hope you've also found it fascinating. It wasn't much of a story, it was more of a lesson on flowers, wasn't it? But yes, I hope you did enjoy it, and I hope you go from this video and you enjoy the rest of your night or day, whatever time it is you're watching this. And I hope you have a lovely time, and I shall see you tomorrow. But depends when you watch tomorrow's video. I could see you for the next story. So bye, boys and girls.